Are you with Julian on the Brown Note? A review of Sigur and their 8th album, Átta. Sigur are the Icelandic initially phenomenon that arrived on an international stage with their second album, Byrjun, which I probably haven't said correctly, which is Icelandic, I think, for an alright start. And it blew everyone away. They became these post-rock titans, but they were also this otherworldly force in music that no one knew quite if there was a precedent for stylistically. They were kind of in this sort of emotive post-rock mood of Radiohead a bit, and indeed I think Radiohead were one of the initial promoters of the band, with Johnson's incredible falsetto vocals and this incredibly moving music that transcended rock entirely. And over their first 3 albums, up until Takk in 2005 and the Untitled album in 2002, that had probably the Nothing song from that is probably my favourite of the Sigur songs, and featured in the movie Vanilla Sky, along with 2 other Sigur tracks, and was recorded from a mixing desk live in the movie about 2 years before the album even came out. So they had this just otherworldly cachet, and they were just phenomenal, and they were sort of like in between the post-rock music, BBC nature documentaries, particularly David Attenborough and Polar Bears for some reason. And Takk contains some really quite prominent songs as well, which was Glossoli and Hip Hip Polar, which is featured on numerous nature programs. And they were the perfect soundtrack artists, and they conjured up the notion of fjordland and beauty, and they were very sort of uncompromising in their music as well, which usually was either sung in, was it Hoplandish, which was a made-up language, or which was basically phonetically using Johnson's incredible vocals, or in Icelandic. So they had this impenetrableness, yet it enabled the music to be almost like eating dinner blindfolded. I can't believe that's coming back. We've actually got a restaurant doing that in Sydney now. Isn't it? It's so bright now, I can't see much. And after that, we got used to them. You know, it's like the Shins as well. When the Shins came out, they were so special, but we just got used to it. So after that, they've continued to tour and release albums very sporadically. Now, I saw them live because I won tickets, amazingly, in amazing seats as well. It was incredible. About a month ago in Sydney, and they did this set of very punishing, a 3-hour set that actually had an interval, very punishing band-led music. And I knew they were coming back with a new, and I was really impressed that they sold out this huge arena, not on the back of touring an album or having released an album since 2013. 10 years later, they sold out this arena because they're one of these acts that people will go to see because it's them and because you don't know when they're going to come around again. But it was very band-based music, and very hard and very intense and punishing, and not much reference to the very prettier tracks that have become synonymous with them. So I was incredibly disappointed when Átta, their 8th studio album, was announced to be an orchestral album with a 41-piece choir. The reason I was annoyed was because I saw them live about over 10 years ago, and they had a lot of orchestral musicians with them on stage at a music festival in Sydney that died sadly, called the Harvest Festival. It was an amazing festival while it lasted. I had tickets to the final one, and the headliner was Massive Attack, and they just cancelled it. Anyway, they had these orchestral musicians, and I felt it blunted and muted their music. So when I saw them live, and it was all really heavy band stuff, I was really looking forward to it. And then when they announced it was an orchestral album, I just wasn't. So here I am to tell you why Átta, the 8th studio album by Sigur, is one of the greatest albums of the year, and next to Sun Signature's album last year, the unbelievably underappreciated Sun Signature album, one of the 2 most beautiful albums I've heard in the last 2 years. They've lost one of their initial band members, I think, through some dodgy stuff as well, but you can read up on that if you want to. Now, this plays out like a classical piece of music. There's no few big songs like they've done in the past, like the ones I mentioned from Takk. That doesn't go for this. This goes for a whole album vibe from start to finish. An incredibly curated, immersive album where each track is fading in and out of the others with virtually no bass or drums, a reliance on orchestration throughout, and blending of Johnson's and still incredibly angelic vocals with the music, probably better than they've ever done. It blends in so well. The opening track, Glue, it's not a song so much as an introduction, a very cinematic long form unfurling of where they're going, very stately, and it's got that BBC Nature documentary vibe on it. The second track, Blueberg, was hysterically a single, over 7 minutes long. It's got the pace and the beauty of an ice flow. It's mournful, incredibly heart-stoppingly beautiful, and Johnson's vocals aren't overused. I don't like. One thing I didn't like about the live gig I saw is that it was a bit too much. It was a little bit too histrionic. Nothing here is. Johnson's vocals aren't overused here at all. They don't just hammer it. It's really classy. Nothing at all musically is overdone. And the ideas percolate over the course of a song. Skell, and that track too is just beautiful. Skell, it just evolves like a classical piece of music, like one long piece of music where each movement is moving in and out, and the elements from one form 50% of the elements for the next, that adds 50% more, that then is picked up by the next. Most of the tracks are very not slight in emotive feeling, not slight in how they're written or performed, but they don't use that many elements at all. It says it's like a 41-piece orchestra, but they've not got like 20 violinists playing all the time. It feels like very few instrumental parts are engaged in each song. And the third track, Skell, is actually increasing in intensity up until we get to Klesser, the fourth track, which has got a real hook on it. And the first and only major use of drums on our whole album. If I describe it as an album without drums or bass and much less Sigur's band playing, it's not going to make anyone want to listen to it, but it really, really is a compliment here. And this track reminded me of Glissoli, where it's got this dum, 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 and it's sort of like this gradual, intensely rising piece of music. And it's got it's probably the most in focus track. And I really like the way that when they move to a progression, there are times when they haven't been as good as they can be, which is flat out one of the finest acts on earth, where the progression can be a bit obvious or get a bit tiring. It doesn't happen here, I didn't think. I thought most of the progressions were really beautiful and interesting, and nothing flagged, given that it's often quite... it's not album music that reaches out with a lot of hooks. It's music, even though that fourth track does have actually hooks in it. It doesn't overplay or go into a middle eighth that is just again repeating something they've done. And like by track 5, it feels like Gustav Mahler. Mahler's my favourite composer, and there's an integrity to his mood and pace. which I feel this album hits. And it's just subtly evolving all the way through. Andra, track 6, it's got piano coming into the mix, and the soundstage gradually moves. I think probably for me the centerpiece and the most striking thing they've done in a very long time is the track Gold. And Sigur have always either sung in Icelandic or in made up phonetic vernacular. And they do on this album, rendering their lyrics as more emotional feeling than actual lyrics. And suddenly this track appears that's in English. It's just mind-blowing. And the lyrics, the verse is golden, frozen, golden, beautiful day. And the chorus, you know you're always welcome to stay. You know at the end of the day, we all die anyway. Which is like hearing this English language come out at that stage with those so Jan Stephen, we're all gonna die motif, was quite unbelievably striking. And it's not a dark album, I don't think. The whole album, Yulur, the 8th track, everything on the album is in continually an organic state of rising and falling almost at the same time. This is music to be a balm for anxiety and the times we live in. It's not dark, it's not oppressive, it's soothing and healing music. Even that track about dying it felt it's okay. It was just beautiful. There's a simple plaintive piano ballad, Fall, which is almost like a break before the longest track on the album, which is 8, which finishes it, and it functions as a summation of most of the musical elements and moods that have come before it. Again, the piano from that track 4 is sort of like carried over. It gets to the halfway stage and then it falls into near silence for half its near 10-minute duration. And that silence actually reminded me a lot of the immortal ambient album Disintegration Loops by William Basinski. It's barely there. It's not as a volume level isn't as high as Basinski's album. It's actually really, really quiet, but it had that feel to it. So I was amazed by this album. From the cover down, the Rainbow on Fire was an incredible image. But just the fact that I didn't expect to want to hear a Sigur Rós album, I wanted them to go back to indie musicianship and sound like some otherworldly variant of Radiohead. And I thought this was a stunning album, their best since Takk, easily. And a very different album to Takk because there's no big song per se. It's a whole piece and one of the most beautiful albums in modern history. And I'm going to give Sigur Rós Átta an incredibly solid 9 out of 10.